Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about a possible Amari Cooper contract extension. Andrew Berry brought this subject up when speaking to the media at the NFL owners meeting, so I want to unpack that possibility. But quick reminder to subscribe to the channel. We are 100 subs away from 34,000. So if you haven't joined yet, please consider doing so if you enjoy our content. Now let's get right into it, starting with what Andrew Berry said today on a possible Amari Cooper contract extension. Look, Coop's a Pro Bowl caliber receiver. He's played really well for us the past 2 years. He's a strong presence in the locker room. We love him. So players like that, you want to make sure that you can retain as long as possible. And we'll work through all of that at appropriate times. Let's effing go. Extend Amari Cooper. Something I didn't think had the greatest chances of happening just a few short weeks ago when the Jerry Jeudy contract extension broke. But to hear Andrew Berry say, this is a guy we want in our locker room, we want to be here long term, that is definitely reassuring that if there's a will, there's a way with Andrew Berry, and they're going to find a way to make sure Cooper, who when you look at the last 2 years, by the way, is playing the best football of his NFL career. That might sound strange for a guy who turns 30 years old in June, but I'm not joking. Like, look at what he's done his 2 years in Cleveland, and now compare it to his 2 years at the end in Dallas. He's got way more receiving yards, fewer receptions, more targets, and one more touchdown, and a much bigger receiving average, which you would think would be the opposite, right? You'd think maybe as the guy got a little bit older, he wouldn't have maybe that big play factor to his game anymore, and he would be more of a short yardage situation player, 3rd and 7, get the first down, or maybe help you out in the red zone a little bit, but that's not the case. Amari Cooper, like we saw in the Texans game on Christmas Eve, can still bring the big plays to the offense. So absolutely 100% on board with extending Cooper. I have very little fears or hesitations about him falling off a cliff. That seems wildly unlikely with the way he's played the last 2 seasons. He has always kept his body healthy. The guy didn't miss a regular season game due to injury until this past year for, I think, 5 years before that. I mean, he has always been available, and I just think this is a guy that you can believe in long term. And the offense clearly, suffers when he's not out there. The very few times, just the 1 or 2 games that happened last year, the Jets and then against the Bengals at the end of the season. So for me, yes, I don't need to overthink this at all. You don't need to overthink this at all. Make sure Amari Cooper is here long term. Now, when it comes to getting this done sooner rather than later, that's got some pretty important relevancy to it because Amari Cooper right now is making $20 million on average. That's not even top 10, and it's not even very far off. It's not even very close to top 10, right? He's $2.79 million a season behind Terry McLaurin. So for the Browns, there's definitely incentive to try and get this done before the season kicks off because you may find yourself in a spot where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are, which is you don't want to make Tampa's mistake, right? You don't want to wait too long, and all of a sudden, Cooper has a great season, and his price goes dramatically up, and now you are paying way more than you would have if you just extended him before the 2024 season kicked off. The way I look at it is, let's say right now, Amari Cooper's value would be $25 million a season, right? Let's keep the math easy. Nice round number, $25 million. And you let Amari Cooper, and I'm looking at this from Amari Cooper's angle here, if he wanted to play out the last year and he has another 1,100-yard season and 8 or 9 touchdowns, maybe that bumps him from $25 million to $27 million, okay? Whereas if Cooper falls off a cliff this year and then he goes into free agency at 30 years old off a 800-yard, 4-touchdown season, he's going to go from that $25 million possibly he could have gotten all the way down to 15, 14 million, somewhere in that neck of the woods. So a $10 million decrease. So the disparity between the decrease and the increase is so jarringly different that if I'm Amari Cooper, I'm taking the deal right now. I'm taking a contract that someone is offering me with big money in it right before I turn 30 years old or right after I turn 30 years old, because you're probably not going to find a much better deal if you let the season play out, but you could definitely find a much worse deal if you do let the season play out and you get injured, for example. I mean, how awful would that be? And now you've got 50% of what you had a few months ago on the table. So for Amari Cooper, there's a ton of incentive to try and get this done before the year. For the Browns, he's been their best offensive player like the last 2 seasons from a consistency standpoint. So I can see why both sides want to find a way to get this done. So the only thing standing in the way of this deal, the money. Jerry Maguire, show me the money. And that's where Jimmy Haslam steps in. And we'll get to that next on the show. But first, today's show is sponsored by Game Time. Spring is here, which means we've got opening day for baseball. We've got playoff basketball soon and hockey, March Madness. All the fun on the floor is heating up. And you should not have to miss any of the action because of ticket prices. With Game Time, you can get killer last-minute deals and all-in prices for all the big events. There is nothing more frustrating than spending time searching for the best ticket prices, which is why you should give Game Time a shot. They have flash deals, they have zone deals, and maybe best of all, they have the all-in price option because no one likes it when you spend all that time researching tickets and you get to the final stage, the checkout page, and the ticket price double because of fees and taxes. But with Game Time, you have an all-in option, so you know exactly how much you're going to spend before you embark on that journey. So download the Game Time app today and use our new code, CHATSPORTS, for $20 off your first purchase. It's the best place to find last-minute seats. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. That's CHAT Sports for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I put all that information in the comments and description of today's video. Let's talk about the money side of things because after giving what was initially reported as a 3-year, $58 million extension to Jerry Jeudy, kind of felt like maybe some of the money devoted to the wide receiver room would be drying up, and with Cooper entering the last year of his contract, that could be a hurdle to bring Cooper back. And that was my biggest fear when this contract extension came out like 2 weeks ago now. But it's not wrong numbers. It's just a little bit misleading because it includes his 5th-year option in 2024. So if you look at the actual contract extension, it's a 3-year, $52.5 million extension, an average of $17.5 million, and they guaranteed $28 million. Right? Originally, we saw $41 million. I was like, $41 million? That's a lot of money for a player that I don't know if has shown us $41 million worth of guarantees. $28 million. Well, now I look at this contract and I go, it's a 2-year, $28 million. So for me, I think the floor here is it's a 2-year, $28 million contract, right? That's the absolute minimum that you are in for. That's the ante, if you will. That's an average of $14 million a season. Jerry Jeudy so far, we look at his career stats really quickly, has shown us he is worthy of a $14 million season extension. Like, that's a guy worth betting on because he has had some good years. No, he has not had that elusive 1,000-yard season, but he has had some really solid seasons, and there have been some issues in Denver that were out of his control. Multiple quarterback changes, multiple head coaches, multiple play callers, and no one really using Jerry Jeudy the way he was intended to be used coming out of Alabama. A twitchy, quick receiver that's going to win at the line of scrimmage and needs the ball in his hands immediately. Not a wide receiver that's going to run down the field and catch a Hail Mary. And that's what Russell Wilson really thrived doing in Seattle, and then carried that over to Denver with Cortland Sutton, who had 10 touchdowns. So, Jack, if we could go back to that last graphic we had on screen, that was the floor, right? Now let's talk about what the ceiling of this contract is. Meaning, if Jerry Jeudy balls out this year, how good are the Browns going to be looking? I would say the ceiling of this contract is it's a 4-year, $65 million deal, $16.2 million on average. So not a huge jump between the floor and the ceiling, but if it's really, really bad for whatever reason, $28 million guaranteed, it's not a small amount of money, but I mean, that's not going to really set you back or anything like that. You know what I mean? It's not going to be a ginormous dead cap hit if you want to move on after 2 seasons. Whereas if Jerry Jeudy balls out and you want more of Jeudy, I mean, you're going to be looking at this contract thinking, what did guys like C.D. Lamb and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, players taken around his draft pick, what are they getting in free agency? What are their contracts? They're getting double what the Browns are paying Jerry Jeudy. So the floor is not too low for Judy's dislike, for a guy that just got to Cleveland to already have some reassurance that they want him long term. That must have been wonderful to hear. And for the Browns, it's not unmanageable if Jeudy does not live up to expectations. And then the ceiling, I mean, you can get great play out of Jerry Jeudy for $16.2 million a season. That's going to be one of the best bargains in the NFL. So do you like the Jerry Jeudy extension? Yes or no? Initially, I had my reservations. I had my fears, and I wasn't fully on board with a 3-year, 58, 59, whatever it was, $1 million contract. Then once we got the real numbers, and I mean, I was a prisoner of the moment, hand up, I got guilty. I was very quick to judge. But once we saw the actual numbers of the extension, took a big deep breath. I was like, all right, this is a contract that I can get behind here. So when you look at the wide receiver room now, you've got 2 out of the 3 starters going into the final year of their contract. Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore. Jeudy locked up. If they find a way to get Amari Cooper locked up for another 2, 3, 4 seasons, whatever it is, then the only odd man out is Elijah Moore, who enters the final year of his rookie contract. And if Elijah Moore were to have a great year, I'm sure the Browns would love to try and find a way to bring him back. But that may be one of those cap casualty moments. Although Andrew Berry trading a second for Elijah Moore, there is definitely some longer-term belief than just 2 years of service. So I don't think with Andrew Berry at the helm, you can rule out all 3 of these guys, as much of a long shot that may feel right now, to come back in 2025. Now, I want to share one more quote from Andrew Berry today before I let you guys get on out of here. On his offseason approach, he said, "One of the things we feel like is a competitive advantage for us has been our contract management philosophy. We're firm believers that in the space, the best front office and the best teams are proactive as opposed to reactionary in market dynamics. If you look at our history, whether it's when we did Miles or when we traded for Coop's contract, really ahead of the shift in the free agent market, or David because of usage issues, it's something realistically that we do a lot of." So what does that mean in English? I think it means it's a bunch of nerds, a bunch of Harvard and Ivy League guys with a sugar daddy named Jimmy Haslam, who has their full support in writing a bunch of big checks, knowing they've got the cash to spend, right? The Browns have ownership that is okay with writing big checks and putting cash on the table at the snap of a finger. And from the Browns standpoint, like Andrew Berry said, they don't want to be reactionary. They want to be proactive. You know, when free agency kicks off and you start getting the first few contracts in, and you're like, oh, that's going to set the market. That's where the bar is. The Browns want to be the one that set the bar, right? They want to be the first ones to it. And so that means extending guys like David Njoku and Jerry Jeudy before they have big breakout seasons, because they believe in them so much, they're willing to make that bet. They're willing to gamble on those guys, and they've got the means to do it. They've got the cash to gamble with. You don't spend money you don't have. The Browns have that money. And I know every NFL owner is rich, but they're not all rich in the same way, right? The Raiders and the Bears, for example, their ownership wealth comes from owning the team. Whereas the Browns' ownership wealth, that comes from a long history of Jimmy Haslam before he ever stepped foot in Cleveland. So when they've got an owner who, if Andrew Berry calls up and says, hey, I want to restructure player A's contract so I can sign this guy in free agency, can you write a signing bonus check for $14 million right now? Believe it or not, there are owners in the NFL that would say no. And that makes it difficult for those GMs to do their job. Andrew Berry, Jimmy Haslam definitely has his shortcomings and his faults, and I think he has learned the last few years. The less he does, the better. Not to meddle with head coaches, not to meddle with draft picks, but to hire a guy like Andrew Berry to do that job and to do it well and to just write checks when called upon and figure out where to put the stadium. That is the only thing on Jimmy Haslam's plate right now. And I think it's worked out pretty well the last few seasons in Cleveland, with a lot more winning the last few years with Andrew Berry at the driver's seat compared to the previous 15, 20 or so years before he got there. So I'm a fan of what the Browns are doing in their approach to contract situations, of wanting to get ahead of the curve and wanting to get contracts down. And of course, you won't win all of your bets in Las Vegas, but that's not unique to the Browns, right? If you're going to get mad at the Browns for having a bad contract, you can do that with every other team, because every other team at some point in the last 2 years has either made a bad draft pick or given out a bad contract. So let's not just look at the losses when they do come up inevitably, but let's also compare them to the wins. And I think so far the winnings are outweighing the losses for Andrew Berry and the gambles he is making in these contracts. Okay, that will do it for us on today's show. We got producer Jack Lauderay pushing the buttons. Jack, which card would you like to go with?
Give me the 8 of clubs.
8 of clubs. Thinking Ace of diamonds. Queen of spades. Queen of spades. All right. That will do it for us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will catch up with you all later.